guys, this is Smithy. Welcome to my channel. Today's video is so very special. We're going to talk about the holiday collection from Pat McGrath, and this is called the Celestial Nirvana collection. Pat McGrath just posted her whole collection, and man oh man am I impressed. This is the first time I feel like Pat McGrath has stepped outside the box, especially in her holiday palettes. We've seen a lot of pinks, a lot of rosy tones from her mothership palettes as well as in the holiday collection. This is 2021's holiday collection, and you can still see she did experiment with a few shades, but you can see like a lot of pinky tones. But it seems like this year's palette is going to be the same size, only like it's going to be like hot pink on the cover. So the only difference I would say is the packaging is like pretty same. The logo from the last year, which was in the middle, and I did mention in last year's video that I hate that the logo is here and she left a space. I wish that there was a shade. Instead, what she did is she put everything together. Still we'll get all 18 shades, but all in like a design, like a dedicated format. It's not hodgepodge or anywhere, which I love. I love when the eyeshadow palette is like pleasing to my eyes and it's not like scattered everywhere, if that makes sense. Nothing like a deal breaker or anything. We're getting the logo like below all the shades, and we're getting a mirror too, and we have some colorful shadows to talk about. She didn't like go completely out of the box. It might seem like when you see the palette that it went like completely off the box, but when you like segregate each and every segment of the palette, I feel like it just makes sense to talk like column by column. So she has like 6 columns. The first 2 columns are more like on the neutral side. The second 2 columns are more on like a cooler blue violet color story, and then the last 2 columns are more on the warmer side, which is more of like a crimson fuchsia color story. I'm super excited. I think we're definitely getting something different, but not like too different. She didn't like completely step out of the comfort zone. She definitely did pop up a green, a blue, a purple, a pink, a red. So we do have those jewel tones like scattered here and there. So I am planning to dupe this palette today just to find like comparable shades that I have in my collection. Am I interested in picking up this palette? Absolutely yes, but I am going to wait for a sale just because I know that these shades are already there in my collection. I love her formula and this palette completely wows me, but I'm definitely going to wait for a sale because I know these holiday palettes are limited edition palettes and it always goes out on sale. So I'm going to wait on to that. If you are interested, do let me know in the comment section below. Out of the whole collection, what are you interested in? Apart from the palette, I would say she's coming out with 2 face palettes, which has 4 blushes and 1 highlighter. I would say super interesting, and I feel like a lot of people would be interested in it just because they're getting so much variety out of those palettes. But if you do have Pat McGrath's blushes already in your collection, which I have 2 of the Divine blushes. The one that I have is more nude Venus. Actually, I'm not wearing any blush, so we'll try this. We have nude Venus here, and we also have Cherish, which is more of like that hot pink shade. I would say definitely more punchier, and Pat McGrath loves her pink blushes. So this is the color variation. I'll pop 1 on each cheek, and this time she's coming out with 4 blushes and a highlighter. I would say the highlighters in those palettes seem super light for me, and one of the blush palettes seems very pink heavy, which I do not need because I don't think I'll wear like more variations of pink on my cheek rather than having just these 2. The other 2 blushes in that first blush palette is definitely on the lighter side and more on the nudie side, which I don't think on my tan skin is gonna show up that well. The darker blush palette, I would say, has 3 shades which is very light, 1 shade which is definitely a lot more deeper, and that highlighter might work on my skin tone. I don't think it's perfect for my skin tone. That's why I can like easily skip on those blush palettes. But talking about that, let's apply these blushes on our cheek, and then we'll talk everything about Pat McGrath's blushes, right? So this is Cherish. So let me pop this on this cheek. And you can see it gives definitely like a pinky, very fresh tone on the cheek. I really love these blushes, and it gives like a very blurred out effect on the cheek too. It's very soft matte finish, especially this matte blushes are super soft matte. This blush on the other hand, the Nude Venus shade, is definitely, I'm going to tilt the brush, it definitely has like a slight bit of sheen to it. So I'm gonna put this on here, and you can see this one is a little more on like the nudie side, I would say, like a nudie pink. But this, I can like build it up to, I would say, like a hot pink shade. Can you see that? I'm going to calm it down a tiny little bit because I look like a clown by the end of the video. So let me even this out on both the sides, but you can see like this is Cherish and this is Nude Venus. This is how much pink I like my cheeks to be. Like, I cannot go more pink than that. And I do not like a lot of terracotta blushes on me too. I like a few, but I like my blushes to be a little more on the subtle side. So let me just even out my face and I'll get right back. So that's how my cheeks are looking so far. I also wanted to give you a few blush palette options that I have in my collection. I have one from Benefit Cosmetics, and this comes with like 3 blushes and their Hoola bronzer. I feel like this is enough variety that we can have. We have a coral blush, we have a nudie pink blush, and we have like a mauve blush. This is a great option to have in the collection. Otherwise, BH Cosmetics has these like 4 blush like quads. This is also absolutely pretty. Again, we are talking about like nudie pink, like mauve pinks, a little bit of coral blushes in the collection. This is in the shade like Vanilla Cream Truffle, and I absolutely love the quality of this. This again is like gives like a very soft matte finish on the face and very affordable option. Apart from that, I do have my blush palette from Lunar Beauty, which is the Moon Prism blush palette. Again, we're talking like similar color story. So if you do have this, I don't think you need that. So yeah, those were like a few options that I definitely wanted like mention to you guys, especially if you do have these things in your collection. I mean, how many blushes do we need? I don't know. Now let's talk about, she is coming out with like another single blush. So very similar to like this packaging. And the new shade is called Nude Venus 2. I have the shade Nude Venus with me. So I'm hoping that it is some variation of this. It seems lighter than this. I won't lie. It seems definitely much more lighter than this in the pictures that she's shown on the Instagram, and it seems a little more on the mauve side. I feel like that blush is going to be light on me, so I'm going to skip on that. That would be an easy pass for me too. The next thing is the highlighter. I am super excited about this highlighter. It's called the Sublime Skin Highlighter in the shade Venetian Nude. It seems like a peachy nude with silver sparkle to it. Now, I do have like a peachy highlighter, which I think is very comparable to that highlighter. And this is my Jaclyn Cosmetics highlighter in the shade Mesmerized. Now, this is again a peachy highlighter, but I would say this has like a gold sheen running throughout it. And Pat McGrath's feels like it's a peach with like a silver sheen running throughout it. I'm very excited about it. I don't know the price points. From the past that I can remember, I feel like these highlighters are gonna be like around 40s, like 45, 48, something like that, which is super pricey. So I'm definitely gonna wait for a sale, but super tempting, super tempting. Let's put this. I feel like this is gonna be very similar to that one. So I'm gonna apply this as my highlighter today. And these highlighters are blinding. I just go with like a lighter hand, but yeah, super blinding, super reflective on the skin. I feel like, yeah, if you want to test out like Jaclyn Cosmetics, highlighters is the first thing that I would recommend from her line, I would say. And lip liners and lipsticks. Really good. Okay, now let's talk about the lipsticks that she's coming out with. She's coming out with 2 lipsticks. One nude and one red. The lipstick shade names that she's coming out with, both of them are in matte trans formula. So if you've not seen her matte trans formula, it's basically, it looks matte when you see it in like the bullet, like this. But it goes on very creamy. Now this one is her true red, and this one is in the shade Elson, which is 003, Elson 003. She has a lot of like deviations of Elson lipstick, but this seems like very, very true red. The one that she's coming out in this collection, it's called Forbidden Love, and the description says classic red. In the pictures, it seems a little more on the, yeah, I would say it's very, very comparable to this. Because in the bullet, it seems like it's a little like orangey red, but in the pictures, now you cannot trust the pictures of Pat McGrath because there's a lot of filters that goes on it. I'll swatch Elson for you guys and I'll tell you how these are super pigmented, super. I feel like this is like a true red. So if you do have classic in your collection, I mean, if you have any red lipstick in your collection, even from Milani has one beautiful formula from their what is it called, matte fetish line. Love that formula. They also have the shade, I think it's what is that shade called? Oh my god, wait, yeah, this one, the shade Poppy. Very, very similar to the other lipsticks. So if you do want like a dupe to that, I would say this is a very, very nice dupe to that. And the formula is very, very comparable to the Pat McGrath one from the drugstore. So I would highly recommend this as a dupe. But also in the nude line, she's coming out with a new shade, which is called Nude Venus. And this is a nude coral shade. The one that I'm wearing is also Pat McGrath lipstick. And I am wearing the shade Venus in Furs. And this is more of like that nudie pink shade. I feel like the one she's coming out with is definitely more on the coral side. Let me just swatch it anyways. This is Venus in Furs. And these lipstick like packaging is 10 on 10. Absolutely luxe packaging. If I have to compare that shade with any of the lipsticks that I have in my collection, I'm going to compare it to ColourPop Luxe lipstick. I don't know if this shade is available or not, but this shade is called Bloom to Bloom. The shade seems very, very similar to this one. And again, this is a coral nude shade. It's super nude on me. I would say I have to pair this with like a brown lip liner, but you can see that peachiness coming through it. I feel like this is going to be very, very similar dupe to that. So I definitely wanted to mention that. Again, it's a very matte lipstick, but very comfortable on the lips. So that's the shade. I don't know if you can see it or not. Stop focusing on my face. She also is coming out with a lot of colorful mascaras. Easy pass for me. I'm not big on like colorful mascara person. I just wear black and brown. I don't wear anything else. So she's coming out with like an aquamarine. She's coming with blue shade and also like a bright pink shade in the mascara. I feel like it's super fun for Pat McGrath to come out with all these things, but it would be an easy pass for me because I don't wear like colorful mascaras. So till now, whatever we have talked about, I'm very, very interested in the highlighter. Now let's talk about the eyeshadow palette because I feel like you guys are all here for the eyeshadow palette dupe. So let's begin. I'm going to go column by column because I feel like that makes more sense. So let's start off with the first column. The first column, the shades are like a brown shade, a bronzy shade, and then a green shade. All three of them, I'm going to dupe it with my Age of Opulence palette from Beauty Bay. So if you do have this palette, a lot of shades are from this, I would say, that you can dupe. So the first shade that I'm going to dupe it with is Prohibition. The second shade that I'm going to dupe is Vintage. And the third shade that I'm going to dupe is Hope. So let's start swatching. Prohibition. Vintage and Hope. Very, very pigmented shades, and these are like spot on dupes, I would say, according to the swatches that I could see from the Trend Moods Instagram. But on the palette, like the second shade seems super, super light, but in the swatches it seems like this shade. So I don't know what to trust, but I would say I would go with the swatches. So I would say this. Very, very beautiful quality with these shades too. So very, very comparable, I would say. Okay, now let's move on to the second column. So for the second column, I'm going to pick out a few more palettes. The first shade, I don't know what is that. It seems like a very champagne-y shade, and I'm going to swatch this shade from her last holiday collection. And this is called Galactic Glow. And for the next shade, it's more of like a cool tone gray brown shade. And I'm going to take that from the Chocolate Martini palette. And the shade is called Bittersweet. So let's take that. And the third shade, I'm going to swatch it from, again, the Age of Opulence palette. And the shade is going to be Champagne, which is this light champagne gold shade. So let's swatch that. This is Galactic Glow. Then we have Glam Light's Bittersweet. And then we have Champagne from Beauty Bay, Age of Opulence palette. So there you go. Those are the first two columns swatched for you guys. I'm going to go like color story wise. So I'm going to swatch like two columns at a time, I would say. And then I'll give you like swatches of the entire palette altogether. But yeah, just to go like column by column, I feel like this makes sense. So let's move on to the third column. Okay, now the next two columns are more on the cooler tone side, and this is more of like that blue violet tone. So the first shade in this column is duped by this shade, which is Lavish, again from the Age of Opulence palette. Then the next shade is duped by the shade Crush, again from the Age of Opulence palette. And the third shade is also duped by this palette, and the shade is called Velvet. So let's watch that. So Lavish. Then we have Crush, and then we have Velvet. Lavish, Crush, and then Velvet. So that's how it swatches. Again, Lavish, Crush, and Velvet. So that would be our third column duped for you guys. Now let's move on to the fourth column. The first shade in that is like a shimmer white shade. Now I personally do not have a shimmer white shade, so what I am going to do is I'm going to basically swatch this shade. It is a shimmer, but it has like that golden shift to it, which also is going to come in the later stages. But I'm going to take this, but I'm going to lay this down with the Blend Bunny Cosmetics white shade, the white matte shade, which is called Hidden. So I'm going to take that just because I need like a white to it. So I'm going to first take that shimmer, and then I'm just going to tap like that white shade over it like that. And then the next two shades are duped by the Age of Opulence palette. The next shade would be Flapper, and the other shade is going to be Revival. Now I would say Revival is definitely more on the brighter side. The shade that is there in the Pat McGrath palette is definitely not as bright as this shade. It's definitely a little more on the muted side. So do keep that in mind. Like, this is punchy. I'm not complaining about that, but it's definitely not as bright as this one. So those are the next two columns swatched. Now I feel like this palette has a lot of golden and like lighter shimmers in the palette, except that blue shimmer. I feel like either it's gonna lean like champagne or gold or pink leaning, exception with the blue shade. And I would say like I have to dull it down just for it to like make sense. So I'm gonna take a little bit away from my fingers just because I don't think that's gonna be that punchy. But this is how the next two columns are going to look. Now let's move on to the final columns, which basically determines a more of like a crimson pink color story. Now the next shade in the palette is duped by the Glam Light Chocolate Martini palette. The shade was called Creme de Coco. The next shade is duped by the same palette, and the shade is called Rich. And then we have the next shade, which is more of that pink shade, a pink matte shade, which is duped by the Primal palette, and the shade would be Nectar. Now, Pat McGrath's last year's holiday palette, let me show you the difference between the shades, but let me swatch this. We have Nectar, we have Rich, and Creme de Coco. And that is how the fifth column looks. Very, very pretty, I would say. Very wearable. But I would say if you do not have this baby pink shade from the Primal palette from Blend Bunny Cosmetics, a very, very similar shade can be found from the last year's Pat McGrath palette, and the shade will be this one, which is called Electrique. This one. And it's going to look very, very similar on the eyes if you're using this as a blending shade. I have Nectar on my crease today from the Blend Bunny Cosmetics palette. But if I do apply Electric on my crease as a blending shade, it's going to look exactly the same. So I definitely did want to mention that as a dupe shade too. Okay, let's move on to the last column. So the first shade is being duped by this shade, which is called Vanilla Vodka. Then we have Primal palette again, and the shade is called Warning. Now, I don't know if it's this hot pink. It feels like it's a blend between pink and red. But if it is like a true red, I mean, you have this shade. But I feel like it's definitely similar to this one. So that's why I'm going to swatch that. And the third shade is definitely duped by the last year's Pat McGrath palette. And it's a pink shimmer. And I'm going to dupe it with this, which is called Heavenly Body. So let's swatch that. We have Vanilla Vodka, then we have Warning, and then we have Heavenly Body from Pat McGrath. So that is the last two columns swatched for you guys. Very pretty, very wearable, but a lot of golden shimmers, I would say. Like, we are experiencing a lot of champagnes and golds and like pinks again, but with a pop of like a green and a blue and a purple, I would say. So when you look at the palette, it seems like wow. But when you dive into each and every like shades, it seems like, yeah, we have 2 or 3 shades, which is outside the box, but otherwise we're getting like similar color stories. So now let me give you like a close-up of all the swatches all together so that you see how the palette's color story is looking like. And I feel like this is a very, very beautiful holiday palette. If you ask me, I love the Pat McGrath's formula of these holiday palettes. You're definitely not getting her Blitz Astral formula from her Mothership palettes, but you're getting very, very beautiful shimmers and mattes from the palette nevertheless. So I feel like it would be really, really good if you do not have these shades over and over again in your collection and you love and adore Pat McGrath's formula. I feel like you definitely cannot go wrong with this because I really, really like it. But I'm definitely going to wait for a sale too, just because I do have all these shades in my collection and I'm very, very picky on what I'm going to pick out for this year. She's also coming out with a 5-pan eyeshadow palette this time. Actually, 2 of them, one more of like a rosy tone color story and one is more on like the cooler tone color story, I would say. The rosy one, I would say I can easily skip on that just because it's like, again, we're talking like peachy shimmers, pinky shimmers, bronzy shimmers. I feel like if you have this palette already in your collection, I would say if you are sticking to this side as well as this side, you're basically getting that 5-pan eyeshadow palette. So I'm not like that keen on that color story. But I would say the other eyeshadow palette, the 5-pan that I'm really interested in is that cool tone palette. She earlier did come out with like this 5-pan. I'm glad that she's coming out with a different packaging because this seemed very, very cheap for Pat McGrath. And I feel like in that cooler tone color story, she has like a charcoal gray. She has like one champagne-y shimmer shade. And then she has like a silver shade, like more of a silver shade, I would say. And then she's got like a bronzy shimmer just like this one and one like this one. I think I know what I can dupe it out with, so wait a second. Okay, I would say if you do have this Nabla palette, the Cutie palette in the shade Platinum in your collection, I feel like this is very, very similar to the Pat McGrath's palette, exception with this brown shade. Am I right or am I right? Like, I feel like we're very, very close. We do have those like silver tones, gunmetal tones, bronzy tones, a very dark charcoal black shade. I feel like this is a very, very close dupe. If you are looking for like that cool tone color story from Pat McGrath, and if you do have this palette, just give it a look. I feel like this quality is like top notch. Like, this is chef's kiss. I love this palette very, very much. So this would be a great dupe for that. So that's all, guys. I really wanted to talk about that whole collection that Pat McGrath just released. And if you are like me and you were like oohing and eyeing about that holiday palette, I just wanted to give you like a comparison shades. If you do have these palettes in your collection, especially that Age of Opulence palette, then you have most of the shades already in your collection, I would say. So I really hope that this video was helpful for you guys. If you did like this video, you know what to do. Do give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you're notified every time that I post next. I generally upload 3 videos every single week, every Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays at 9 AM Eastern Standard Time. Until next time, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.